Jeffrey Epstein, disgraced financier, famous for rubbing elbows with presidents, royalty, and billionaires. A man who seemed untouchable until he wasn't. Let's unveil the biggest scandal the world has ever seen. A story of power, corruption, and people who never thought they'd be exposed. Caught in the depravity of Jeffrey Epstein. July 6th, 2019. Federal agents have gathered at the entrance of 9 East 71st Street on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. In front of them, a 7-story, $50 million mansion owned by New York financier and socialite Jeffrey Epstein. A little less than an hour before, he was arrested at Teterboro Airport for allegations made against him from a little over a decade before. Between 2002 and 2005, Jeffrey Epstein was accused of bringing men to this very mansion, where he would be massaged by them and later coerce them into unconsensual acts. These girls were underage, had no previous work experience, and truly believed they were just there to give some creepy old man a massage. In exchange for their naivety, they were systematically abused and paid for the trouble. Now, these victims were in no way complicit in what happened to them. It was against their will, via coercion. No doubt about that. But the exchange of money created complicated feelings in most victims, many of whom were encouraged to bring friends along with them in exchange for more money. Guilt, shame, and anger forced these young girls into silence, and many were intent on living with their pain privately. But just as many more were not. And even though he was finally in jail for his crimes, the investigation wasn't over. And on July 6th, 2019, the FBI was tasked with cataloging anything of importance in the 51,000 square foot manor. The agents rang the doorbell, but no one answered, so they breached the door. Armed officers rushed inside to sweep the rooms, one by one, and secure the property. A butler and staff are removed from the premises and wait outside. For the first time in over 2 decades, the house is no longer in Jeffrey Epstein's control. Vanity Fair journalist Vicky Ward, in her 2003 profile on Epstein, describes her arrival at the home. Inside, you feel you have stumbled into someone's private Xanadu. This is no mere rich person's home, but a high-walled, eclectic, imperious fantasy that seems to have no boundaries. The entrance hall is decorated not with paintings, but with row upon row of individually framed eyeballs. These, the owner tells people with relish, were imported from England, where they were made for injured soldiers. Next comes a marble foyer, which does have a painting in the manner of Jean de Buffet, but the host coyly refuses to tell visitors who painted it. The office features a gilded desk, which Epstein tells people belonged to banker J.P. Morgan. On the desk, a paperback copy of the Marquis de Sade's The Misfortunes of Virtue, which tells the tale of the protagonist of the novel, was on the desk. Amid such splendor, much of which reflects the work of the French decorator Alberto Pinto, there is one particularly startling oddity: a stuffed black poodle standing atop the grand piano. No decorator would ever tell you to do that, Epstein brags to visitors, but I want people to think what it means to stuff a dog. Now, agents are tasked with photographing the entire space and collecting evidence of Jeffrey Epstein's crimes. The FBI, in collaboration with the NYPD, are on site. Over the coming days, they discover the infamous massage room with explicit paraphernalia, a safe filled with cash, diamonds, and other documents, like an Austrian passport, printed in the late 80s, issued to Epstein under a fake name and country of origin, hundreds of hard drives, CDs, and physical stores, labeled with black marker, female names, and ages. This discovery is the backbone of the case we are all familiar with, because together they contain hundreds, if not thousands, of explicit images, many of them depicting men, many of them unidentifiable. Today, the horrific crimes of Jeffrey Epstein are more prevalent and relevant than ever before. Discoveries are still being made, and with each new crime that enters the public conscience, more questions are created than answered. How did Epstein manage to keep his crimes hidden for so long, across multiple residences, states, and nations? What exactly were those crimes? And more pressingly, how was a monster like Epstein allowed to operate for so long? Well, with recent developments, these are all questions we can answer today, as I take you through the horrific criminal empire of Jeffrey Epstein, one step at a time. Here's a brief refresher of everything Epstein did and what happened before we get into the more recent developments. In 2005, the parents of a went to Palm Beach police to report that their daughter had been hired by Epstein to perform a massage at his Palm Beach mansion. They began to investigate and found dozens of similar allegations that existed against Epstein. The full breadth of his criminal empire was yet to be uncovered, but this was the first inkling of his crimes that law enforcement was aware of. But Epstein, of course, was a powerful man. His career began as a school teacher, but at the age of 22, he was fired for inappropriately fraternizing with underage female students. From there, he decided to take a swing at Wall Street and spent a decade ruthlessly clawing his way up the ladder and systematically abusing female office assistants until he was once fired again. This time for committing a Regulation D violation, which essentially means he committed fraud on Wall Street, which is an oxymoron, but whatever. From there, he starts his own investment firm and marries socialite Ghislaine. How do you pronounce this lady's name? Who cares? She's evil. Ghislaine Maxwell. And through his personal and business connections, he eventually came into contact with some very powerful and established leaders in corporate America and elsewhere. And Jeffrey Epstein, importantly, was a master of both finances and tax avoidance. So he began working relationships with very important people all over the globe. Prince Andrew, Sarah Ferguson, Elon Musk, Richard Branson, Donald Trump, Bill Clinton, Stephen Tisch, Casey Wasserman, Ehud Barak, Larry Summers, Howard Lutnick, Sergey Brin, and Miroslav Lajkak, to name a few. And that's not speculative, by the way. All of those names are confirmed. From the files, no debate. Whether they committed any crimes, well, charges haven't been made yet. Let's just say that. Moving on. In 2005, Jeffrey Epstein was accused and charged with but something sneaky happened. Suddenly, during the prosecution, he took a secret plea deal, one that wouldn't be revealed until a decade later. Jeffrey Epstein pled guilty to state charges instead of federal charges. He served a 13-month prison sentence, but it really wasn't much of a prison sentence because he was allowed work release, meaning that every day, for 12 hours a day, he was allowed to leave jail and conduct business as usual. And after 13 months, he was set free. No one heard mention of Epstein or his crimes until 2018, when investigative journalist Julie K. Brown published a series in the Miami Herald titled Perversion of Justice. In it, she reported that dozens, maybe hundreds of girls had been by the hand of Jeffrey Epstein and several high-profile conspirators. I feel like she never gets talked about in these recaps, but Julie K. Brown is the reason we know any of what happened with Epstein. She blew the whistle on the island, the systematic abuse, the organized criminal empire that enabled this abuse to happen, the hundreds of clients, the hundreds of girls, and just as importantly, the secret plea deal he took in 2005 to make the whole thing disappear. Thus began the firestorm that is Jeffrey Epstein. And page by page, the true depravity began to reveal itself. The island, the mansions, the properties were all revealed in the coming months. If you told someone in 2017 that you believed there were multiple billionaires and powerful individuals in government and finance flying on a plane nicknamed the Lolita Express out to a remote island in the Caribbean with the express intention of coercing into explicit and illegal acts against their will, and the whole thing had been happening for over 20 years, and the government was covering it up, you'd be laughed out of the room. But that's exactly what happened. Now, the island is the most widely available source for how depraved Epstein was, and its contents were just as damning as the ones found in the New York mansion. Hundreds of images of movies burned on CDs, contact lists of high-profile individuals, cash, valuables, and massage rooms. Lots and lots of massage rooms. These rooms filled with toys, lubricant, and surveillance cameras to watch it all happen. But unlike the mansion, it was remote, in the middle of the ocean. Victims were flown to the island with no knowledge of who would be there, what was going to happen, and for how long. They were completely and utterly trapped. And yet, even with all of this information, the public wasn't informed about everything that was happening or who was all involved. And that, in my opinion, was a purposeful deception, with the hope that we would all forget about Jeffrey Epstein and let it go, thereby letting those responsible go. But the people aren't so forgetful and much, much more persistent. So over the past 8 years, we have been forcefully squeezing the information out of our government officials, much to their chagrin. These, as we know them, are the Epstein files. And just to clarify, what I just said, and this whole script for that matter, is my opinion. And this was all allegedly completely on purpose. And although they censored it all to shit, we got a lot of information from the newly released Epstein files. So with that recap finished, let's go over some of the newest developments. Firstly, one of the biggest things that nobody seems to be talking about is the massive stock of home videos created by Epstein and company. For the first time in its 5-year history, we get to see a visual glimpse into the world of Jeffrey Epstein. For instance, a video of a dressed in a sailor costume that's been circulating the web in recent days. This video was released by the DOJ, but taken down not 10 hours later for unknown reasons, but it is truly horrific. This corroborates a series of handwritten notes released in the files, where it states that Ghislaine Maxwell put into schoolgirl outfits and other such costumes to entertain guests. Then there's the now infamous photo of Prince Andrew standing or crouched over a which only a still photo has been released. Then there's the censored videos of many victims, like this one of Epstein playing with some various censored out. But what about the content of the CDs and the hard drives? Well, most of that content is illegal or hasn't been released, or both. Now, I could make an entire video just dedicated to these home videos, but for the time being, let's move on to the next big developments, which answers the question, how did Epstein's vast criminal empire operate? Well, the gravity of the crimes seems to have been centered around 4 primary locations, with Jeffrey Epstein serving as the ring leader. These locations were the Island, Little St. James, his mansions in Palm Beach and Manhattan, and Zorro Ranch, his sprawling 7,622-acre property in New Mexico. We'll be talking about Zorro Ranch a little later, so get ready for that. So, who are the alleged perpetrators that we know of? Ghislaine Maxwell, his partner, who is currently serving a 20-year sentence for trafficking, was something of a fence for acquiring girls. She would manage the underage girls and then slowly manipulate them to Epstein's liking, or the liking of any powerful individuals they were made to pleasure, and oversaw their payments. Depending on how illicit the act was, they would be paid more. And like I mentioned before, if a girl had a couple of friends that might be good candidates for horrific deeds, they would be paid a finder's fee for bringing them in. Then there's Sarah Kellen, former interior designer for Epstein, who started working for Epstein in the early 2000s as his executive assistant. Allegedly, and again, this isn't officially confirmed yet, she was responsible for all of the scheduling that happened across the multiple properties, meaning she choreographed the travel for both victims and perpetrators, scheduled the massages, prepared the girls' rooms for the multiple days and nights they would be expected on the properties, and prepared the actual spaces with ample paraphernalia, let's call it. Though she hasn't been charged with anything yet and has denied any wrongdoing. Then there's Jean-Luc Brunel, former Parisian modeling scout, who was also allegedly responsible for finding dozens of girls for Epstein, much in the same way as Ghislaine. He has his own rap sheet though, with multiple accusations of drugging and assaulting women in the Paris modeling world since a decade before Epstein, though he strongly denied these allegations, and the flight logs prove he took at least 25 trips on the Express. Although Jean-Luc Brunel died on February 19th, 2022 in his prison cell by S-word. Then there's Leslie Groff, who was the alleged caretaker for the girls, allegedly seen to their needs like food, water, clothing, and such during their stays. She served as the assistant to Sarah Helen and would do anything that Sarah was incapable of doing for one reason or another. Then there's Richard Kahn, Epstein's accountant, who facilitated all of the cash payments between Epstein and his victims. Normally, this would raise red flags in banks, but because of Richard Kahn and the nature of Epstein's incredible wealth, the banks were allegedly willing to turn a blind eye. As long as they made money, they allegedly didn't care. Then there's also Darren Indyke, Epstein's lawyer, who kept the ship floating through the 2005 scandal. He also received a massive $50 million from Epstein's will after he died. And then Nadia Marchenko, personal assistant, pilot of Epstein's private aircraft, the Lolita Express I mentioned earlier. Also, and this is a new development, Epstein stated that he had bought Marchenko from her parents in the 1990s. That's true, genuine testimony by one of the victims, who claims that Epstein said that. Those people, however, were just the main culprits. There were dozens, if not hundreds, of other people involved. The houses needed to get cleaned. Victims needed to get from place to place. People needed food. Properties needed security. So there were many other people who either knew what was going on or chose to ignore the blatant abuse taking place. Cooks, security guards, cleaning staff, butlers, assistants, drivers, personal shoppers, etc. In testimony during the many court cases, these people often say the same thing. They either chose willful ignorance or they had a rough idea of what was happening, but weren't confident enough to report it, which is the laziest cop-out I've ever heard. But this is an important point. It's why I've decided to discuss it here. This wasn't just Epstein. He wasn't doing this alone. This was an organized, structured hierarchy of individuals working like a well-oiled machine to people, period. Now, let's talk about Zorro Ranch, because it's been all over the news lately, and there's a lot of confusion surrounding that mysterious property, and for good reason. Of all the properties Epstein owned, we know the least about Zorro Ranch, because the government seemed all too willing to leave it alone. In fact, while Epstein was alive, there was no confirmed raid on Zorro Ranch by any organization. Not the FBI, not the New Mexico Police Department, not the DOJ, no one. In 2019, the New Mexico Police actually attempted to investigate, which included the interviewing of possible victims. But that investigation was stopped at the request of federal prosecutors, presumably because they believed it would impede on the trials already taken place. But this still raises some red flags. The ranch was incredibly remote and incredibly large, clocking in at 7,622 acres, or 12 square miles. That's about half the size of Syracuse, New York. You know, a metropolitan city. That is to say, it was incredibly huge. But in late 2025, with the release of the Epstein files, greater scrutiny fell on the government of New Mexico when new documents surfaced, and they raised some very concerning implications. The public became aware for the second time since 2019 that Epstein had allegedly expressed interest into turning Zorro Ranch into, and I can't think of a better way to say this, a victim farm. Women would be taken to the ranch, which he allegedly referred to as a compound, where he would allegedly forcefully inseminate them and have them have his children. Whether he wanted them to be allowed to leave is unclear. According to those individuals who spoke with the New York Times, he wanted to, quote, seed the human race with his DNA. That's presumably a quote of Epstein's. But once again, that's just an allegation, proposed and corroborated by scientists and acquaintances of Epstein's, but an allegation nonetheless. I can't prove that, and until the ranch is investigated, nobody else can either. Whether or not it's true, well, considering everything else Epstein has done or entertained, in my opinion, it's not outside the realm of possibility he might have wanted to do this. But this isn't necessarily a new development. It's been speculated on for half a decade now. But recently, a new allegation has developed. On November 21st, 2019, someone claiming to be a former staff member of Zorro Ranch emailed a man called Edward. The claimee attaches videos as insurance against Epstein and attempts to blackmail this Edward for 1 Bitcoin, which at the time was worth $4,000. He writes the following: "Edward, this is sensitive, so it will be the first and last email depending on your discretion. You can choose to take it or trash it, but this comes from a person that has been there and seen it all. As a former staff at the Zorro, the material below was taken from Jeffrey Epstein's home as my insurance in case of future litigation against Epstein. Sorry, no questions. What is damning about Jeffrey Epstein is yet to be written. Did you know somewhere in the hills outside the Zorro, 2 foreign girls were buried on orders of Jeffrey and Madam G? Both died by strangulation during rough, intimate time." That's not what was said, but you get the gist. Here are the video footage of Jeffrey Epstein. And then the person sends 7 different links, which are obviously redacted, with each of them having a unique, disturbing name, ranging from R-word fantasy video to girl from Bay Area, S-word attempt confession to Madam G. And all of the rest of them have as equally horrifying titles. But he continues, "Please arrange for 1 Bitcoin by 6 p.m. EDT today, Thursday, 11/22/19, to the Bitcoin wallet address provided. The USB will be sent anonymously to your attention by overnight courier upon receipt of the funds. You have my assurance this is exclusive, never shared before, no attorneys, no samples, no questions please, confirm ASAP." Because we don't know the sender's email, we don't know if this man appears in other files, or what came of the conversation. But we do know that the email was not deleted. He did say if they believed it was fake, to trash it. So whether or not they paid the Bitcoin is unclear. Whether or not this is true is unclear. But the implication is a devastating one. If this email is to be believed, which is alleged, then Epstein wasn't just he was murdering them too. And presumably, there are bodies buried on the grounds of Zorro Ranch. In light of this new information, the government of New Mexico voted and approved a truth commission to finally investigate the property. It's too early to speculate on what they'll find, but judging by Epstein's track record, I'd speculate it won't be good. That's my opinion. In the file release, we also received disturbing information that might indicate Epstein didn't just coerce his victims. There's evidence that seems to suggest that Epstein and his team of monsters were also drugging the girls. An email from March 2014 reads, "Ask Chris about my trumpet plants at nursery." Trumpet plants, which alludes to specifically angels' trumpets, which are a member of the nightshade family. And that plant is incredibly toxic. Handling them in any way requires protective gear. You can't even touch them without inviting dangerous side effects. But current speculation suggests that Epstein may have been growing them. Why? Well, the plant produces a chemical called scopolamine. Scopolamine, when ingested, can cause dizziness, drowsiness, hallucinations, or in some reported cases, memory loss. Its name in Colombia is devil's breath, and Vice called it the no free will drug. Colombians dry it and blow it into people's faces to induce confusion and extreme suggestibility. According to Google, it induces a state of deep submissiveness, delirium, and severe memory loss, making victims unable to resist commands or recall events. Well, why is this relevant? Well, it turns out Jeffrey Epstein received multiple emails with the word scopolamine included. One of his emails was titled "Scopolamine, powerful drug growing in the forests of Colombia that eliminates free will," which proves at the very least he was aware about scopolamine. And in fact, he was in active conversation about it as early as 2015. And just very, very disturbing that a man like Jeffrey Epstein is interested in a drug that eliminates free will. And so what about the victims themselves? Well, one of the files that's recently been released is a diary, presumably from one of the underage victims. It includes various scrapbook-style images, various anecdotes and short poems, and an insane testimony of alleged at the hands of Ghislaine Maxwell, Jeffrey Epstein, and associates. According to emails between this victim's lawyer and another individual, she was 16 at the time of writing it and was institutionalized for mental health issues as a result of her long-term abuse. The diaries have been released and the entries decoded because they were originally written in a simple code. And fair warning, the next couple of minutes contain some of the most sickening anecdotal evidence of the crimes I have ever encountered. And it's heartbreaking, disgusting, and downright horrifying. Here is an excerpt from one of the first few pages. Walk down Madison Avenue to 71st Street. My mother has lost her mind. Even though Ghislaine said it was best to take me home because Mr. Black is so important for some reason over my health. There is going to be hell to pay. I ruined their trip and I am dramatic when that fat man bit me. He threw me on the floor and blood all over Jeffrey's carpet, and I am the issue? Who the hell bites someone? Sick. No one is that important, and Leon can go F himself. I hate New York. For context, according to her lawyer, this girl was systematically abused by her own family, who gave her away to Jeffrey Epstein on multiple occasions. She was allegedly forced to entertain a man called Leon Black, who is the former chairman of the board at Apollo Global Management. He is accused of multiple allegations of, and according to this victim's lawyer, he did unspeakable things to the victim. And in the act, he bit her, allegedly. When she made a fuss about it, the resulting reaction was that of anger. She had ruined their weekend. And if this made you absolutely sick, good. It should make you sick. This is the testimony of one victim of Jeffrey Epstein and gives just a glimpse, a slight glimpse of some of the abuse these girls had to endure. Now, I didn't mention this, but there's actually a second diary this victim wrote. It has the same scrapbook aesthetic, the same context, and the same tone. But throughout these two diaries, we see a couple of horrifying images. Sonograms. Images of unborn babies in the womb. Here are some of the associated scrapbook-style poems on the pages surrounding in the sonogram images. Book 1, page 10. I heard the heartbeat even when she put her hands over my ears. Aren't pictures enough for them? Torture. Should I deeply miss them? Have these all been murders? Does this make me a killer? Book 2, page 6. Never imagined the joy and tears her future held. Poured out an ocean of tears. Pain. Book 2, page 13. A lot of cold showers. Blood on their hands. No doctor. Talk to no doctor. Damage. Dead. There's plenty of speculation about what these entries might mean, but I'm not going to discuss it. We won't know until the trial concludes, and I'm not here to make up my own theories, but I think it's safe to say none of what you just heard bodes well. And I hate that I have to keep saying allegedly because I frankly don't want to get sued, but allegedly something happened with this girl's unborn babies. And allegedly, Ghislaine Maxwell and Epstein were the ones who did it. We know nothing else right now, but the crushing weight of this information is enough to make a grown man cry. That's the truth. And this brings into question another issue: the victim's privacy. This month, the DOJ has been caught in a tidal wave of criticism and congressional hearings over their release of the files. And to give you a little background, on November 19th, 2025, Congress passed the Epstein Files Transparency Act, which required the Department of Justice to not only release the files, but put them into a searchable database with limited redactions to protect privacy. And what we got was certainly searchable. When the files were released, a couple of things were immediately clear. One, many believe the files are incomplete. There has been heavy debate about this, but lawmakers are certain that there are entire sections of the files that have been removed. I won't speculate on why that might be the case because your guess is as good as mine. But I imagine if files are actually missing, it isn't because they are irrelevant. 2. Multiple victims, numbering in the dozens, had their names exposed in the release of the files. Victims who were completely innocent and just wanted their privacy had it unceremoniously revoked. For that reason, many of the files have been pulled, again in the name of protecting privacy. Now, the release of 5 million files in 30 days is going to be difficult. No question about that. I won't minimize how hard a job that is on such a short timeline. That's reasonable enough. The victims' names have been accidentally released. Why is it that none of the perpetrators' names were accidentally leaked? Was it so our government could pull back the files in the name of privacy? Was it a stall tactic? Was it blatant corruption or incompetence? Regardless of what it was or is, the American people are rightfully enraged. Here's my opinion. We've seen both parties in our government playing hot potato with this issue for so long. It's disgusting, and it's not an accident either. If they can keep tossing it around long enough and convince the public this is some complicated issue, they don't need to do anything about it. And it dies, just like every other issue the public has with their governance. But that's the thing. There is nothing complicated about this. Right now, our government has sent one person to prison over this, Ghislaine Maxwell. She is 5 years into a 20-year sentence. And once again, that's not enough. I say this every video, and I'm going to keep saying it. These people should not have the option to be free. Why do we allow our government to keep protecting these people? This person gets 20 years for... It's truly unbelievable. In my opinion, these people who are protecting the perpetrators and the perpetrators themselves should rot in prison. And that goes for every single person who has aided, abetted, or obstructed the execution of justice. Throw away the key. That is the minimum we should be doing for these victims. And I'm tired of our government treating this like a political platform. It's all smoke and mirrors, and I'm sick of it. Jeffrey Epstein. The word depravity was made for him, defined as moral corruption, wickedness. He is evil wrapped in a suit. And now, through the slow unveiling of these files, We don't just see the depravity of one man. No, we see the depravity of dozens. Dozens of people at the top of our government, our financial institutions, our elite schools, our Fortune 500 companies. Epstein is no longer just a man, he is the embodiment of corruption and depravity. Over the coming years, we will continue to uncover just how far his reach stretched, and we will see, beyond shock, beyond disbelief, beyond horror, how sick, how twisted, and how disgustingly rotten many at the top truly are. Epstein's story is almost too wicked to believe. A man who owned an island, tens of thousands of acres, mansions worth tens of millions of dollars, every car, every plane, and every toy one could ever imagine. And yet, at the same time, a perverted, a monster, sharing his perversions with everyone around him. And it all happened right under our noses for decades. Which makes you wonder, are there more like Epstein? Hidden away on some private island, living a life of power, corruption, and abuse? Is Jeffrey Epstein one of 100? One in 10,000, a million? Or is Jeffrey Epstein a one of one? Well, that is for you to decide. But one thing is for certain. We cannot look away. We cannot stay silent, because as long as they hide in the shadows, the corruption will continue. And we, the people, are the ones who must shine the light. And before we end, just remember, the government is not your friend. Major corporations are not your friend. Banks aren't your friend. They exist to serve you. And how it looks right now, we, the people, are the only party interested in justice. Continue applying pressure, never stop fighting, and maybe the monsters responsible will finally get what they deserve.